around skills and skill sets needed. The session is meant to be both informative and interactive. So if you have questions, please use the chat box to post them, and we will ask them. Most of the questions we're going to hold till the end, but if you have a burning question while the slide's up, post it, and we may stop in the middle to do that. So it's great to introduce Peter. As he and I discovered, I think we both grew up about 10 kilometers apart, just south of Manchester. And he has some similar interests and activities to me. So he started life as an engineer, but then working in R&D, he decided to do an MBA with a focus on behavioral science. And it's kind of really interesting because when people look at my profile for engineer and they turn it upside down because I don't behave like a typical engineer. So I tend to find that people that have the engineering background but don't behave like typical engineers are the people that I can relate to. Anyway, after his MBA, he stayed with Coltoads and moved to textiles, involved in artistic design, and then ran a leading European brand for them. In the 90s, he started the organization that he now leads, Quest Management, and has been involved with helping many large organizations on various aspects of their innovation journey. IBM, AIG, RIM, and many SMEs. He's been very involved in various aspects of innovation and innovation skills, which is his topic today, but he's also been involved in the formation of the new ISO standard on innovation management, ISO 56000, which is going to be really interesting. As a person that works in innovation, I was kind of very concerned that bringing standards to innovation might actually inhibit innovation. But I was so impressed when I sat through a one-day workshop that Peter ran, that how much the people putting the standard together had actually combined and integrated practice with theory to come up with a document that I think is going to be very useful. And I think in the future, we're going to see a lot more discussion about that. But obviously, in the short term, we're talking about how people can better prepare for success in this new volatile world. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Peter Merrill.
Okay, so are you handing the screen to me now, Andrew?
I think you have it.
I have it. Okay.
Yeah, if you press share screen, you're good.
What I will do then is go into the document that I need, if you just bear with me, and let's okay. So apologies for the pause there. I always find this a little tricky with Zoom, but here we are. Let's go into full screen now. So good afternoon, everyone. And Andrew, thank you so much for inviting me to speak in this session. And let me give everybody just a little bit of background before I get into the content. It actually goes back 5 years ago, and I was asked to speak at a conference in Boston, and they said, we'd like you to speak about innovation. I said, well, yes, fine, okay, but you're talking a pretty wide scope. What have you got in mind? And they said, well, actually, we're in a high-tech sector. Talk about the future of innovation. And I thought, oh my God, they're asking me to sort of look in a crystal ball. But as fate would have it, it was January 2015. The World Economic Forum met that month in Davos, and they issued a report called The Future of Jobs. And, you know, I built my session then around that, and everybody said, wow, because what was being projected in 2015 back then seemed totally out of the park. And yet here we are in 2020, and the projections from 2015 are a reality that we're dealing with right now. And I have to say, my own approach to that report has evolved during that 5 years. So That WEF report's called The Future of Jobs. And even though it's 5 years old, it's something you can download. And I do recommend you turning to it and having a look at what it has to say. What it particularly points us to is the new competences that we need today. And top of the list, 2015 and 2020, was problem and is complex problem solving skills. And it points to the fact that over a third of all jobs in all industries are going to require skills in complex problem solving. So what I'm going to explain in this session, in this webinar, is the primary competences which the report has flagged for us, but also what the report doesn't necessarily flag to us, and what I've kind of developed over the subsequent time is how all these skills actually link together and not only give us the competences, but give us the process for complex problem solving. So these are the top 10. It sounds like a music chart, but these are the top 10 skills in 2015, if you look at the left of this screen. And as you see, complex problem solving at the top of the list. You'll say I've also marked in blue at number 6, something called quality control. And if you look to the right, it's not even on the list in 2020. And that is a reflection on how machine learning, big data, machine learning and AI have all, in effect, taken those skill sets out of the game. People who used to be used for analyzing data and all of that kind of stuff, increasingly their work is being done through machine learning and AI. Also notice in 2015, at the bottom of the list is a little thing called creativity. Now, look at the right-hand column, 2020. Still top of the list is complex problem solving. Creativity is moved up to number 3. And at number 6 is a new skill, emotional intelligence. And what I'm going to focus us on is that right-hand column and how the first 6 skills all in fact merge together, how we need creativity and critical thinking for complex problem solving, but also to enable both of those, especially creativity, we need collaboration and emotional intelligence. And as, shall I call it, an umbrella over that, are the skills of people management. I'm not going to deal much with that, but I'm going to very much focus on complexity, collaboration, EI, creativity, and then critical thinking. If you look at everyday problem solving, the techniques we have, and there are many of them, and people who perhaps worked in the world of quality will be aware of them, they tend to follow a very similar methodology. And they tend to focus on a process where the problem appears. So we repair a step or we clarify requirements. And often people actually can solve these problems on their own or with a colleague. Now that's fine for a process problem, but when you're dealing with complexity, and to the title of this session, we are in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. When you're dealing with all of that, and it's usually with a system situation, everyday problem solving ain't gonna do it. So these are the steps when we're dealing with complexity, ambiguity, volatility, uncertainty. First of all, we've got to be able to recognize complexity. And, you know, it's interesting. People say, yes, I can, but it's not always obvious. And I'll give you some pointers. Then, given that we're dealing with complexity, we need a diverse group of solvers. We can't do it on our own. And because they're diverse, to enable diversity to work, that new skill I just flagged of emotional intelligence becomes of prime importance. It's how we work together. And so we're beginning now to create a collaborative environment, which I'll explain. And all of that, shall I call it, preparatory work is necessary in order to enable creativity. And steps 5 and 6 are the classic divergence, convergence, which we've all heard about for the longest time. But we've got to enable that divergence, and we've got to enable that convergence. Divergence finds many alternative solutions. Convergence is where we narrow down to find the best path forward. So first, how do we recognize complexity? Well, I think, you know, we intuitively recognize it, but let me give you a bit of the detail. Generally, complex problems are very dynamic. They won't stand still for us. They're moving all the time. That's one good reason why you have more than one head looking at it. Then what we start to recognize is when you're dealing with complexity, the problem usually exists in a systemic situation. There are many elements, and the problem problems, and they're often multiple, tend to occur because links are breaking. And as I just said, the problem will tend to be within a systemic situation, and there are many layers within the system. Now, what I've shared here is not especially new. In fact, the original work of W. Edwards Deming many years back pointed to the fact that even when you look at a process problem, 90% of those problems are the result of the system in which the process operates. And so when you're dealing with complexity, cause and effect are often not adjacent. And a small event at one end of the system can lead to a major consequence at the other end of a system. And a book I read many years ago, very readable book, it sounds technical, but it's not. It was a book written by James Gleick, and it's called Chaos. Very attractive title. And he's a very good writer, I can tell you that. And in his opening chapter, he talks about the butterfly effect. And it goes like this. A butterfly flaps its wings in Singapore, and it leads to a hurricane in the Caribbean. So cause and effect are not adjacent. We see this every day in our organizations. And I'm not picking on the salespeople. They have a tough job. But what classically happens is the salesperson talks to the customer, finds out what the customer wants, and then passes that on to the design engineering people who develop the new service or new product, and they then pass that on to operations, and suddenly there's chaos. Why? Well, the customer is a moving target. They don't sit there. They're constantly evolving. They have fresh ideas. Or the salespeople have not been able to capture all the customer's thoughts. Or the design people have not necessarily, they've had to make assumptions, and that leads to chaos in operations. And so what we're dealing with is a constant changing context leading to things being erratic and unpredictable, and this gives this appearance of chaos. There are lots of unknowns, and as we move forward trying to solve the problem, we will find unknown unknowns. You've heard that term before. So clearly, in order to deal with this, we need a diverse body of knowledge. Now you'll see at the bottom of this slide that we actually run a workshop on this as well. And in the first workshop session, we actually look at the whole business of knowledge networking and the importance of having at least 2 degrees of separation when you're gathering knowledge. That's the beginning of the problem-solving business. So that leads us then into how do we gather knowledge? Well, we need a diverse body of people, and there's some fascinating research that was done by Professor Scott Page at Caltech. He was researching the effect of IQ on the ability to solve problems. And so what he did was he brought together a group of Mensa people, high IQ. And then he said, okay, in order to test their ability, I need a control group. I mean, this is classic stuff. And so he went into the cafeteria and he found this random group of people. And you're probably wondering, what's this picture got to do with it? Well, he called the group the brown socks people. They were just ordinary guys, but they were all different. Key point, the Mensa group were all possessing the same knowledge. It was not additive. But the ordinary group, the ordinary guys, had a very diverse body of knowledge, and it was additive. And as a result, and he only found this later, the Mensa group was repeatedly beaten in his test. He was expecting them to win all the time, and he just wanted a control group. And what he discovered was they were losing all the time. His conclusion, there is actually a low correlation between IQ and problem solving. And far more important is diversity in the body of knowledge that you have. And we've learned that breakthroughs occur at intersections of body of knowledge. And that's not a new finding. That goes back to World War II and the concept of the think tank. Think tanks, you know, you would bring together people from universities, market gardeners, welders, a whole range of people that had different experience. But the challenge to diversity is the thing that you've probably heard of, the mirror trap. We tend to be attracted to people similar to ourselves. And the mirror trap makes us feel comfortable, but it blocks diversity. We like to reinforce our existing beliefs. And I mean, think about your own friends, the people you know. You know, Canada's a pretty diverse country compared to most. But even then, think about how many people you've got who are in different professions or a different country of origin. Certainly in the GTA, that's less of an issue. Or speak a different native language. I do a lot of work in ISO, and so I tend, as a result of that, to have a very diverse group of friends. And you know, I love that, I really do. We have another dimension though today, and that is that we have the multi-generational workforce as well. And there's often friction there. And if we can overcome that, it opens new doors in terms of diversity. And as we all know, millennials collaborate very well and freely share ideas, but within their own group of millennials. And I've heard Generation X people, for example, be quite critical of millennials. So it ain't necessarily the boomers, the old guys, who are critical of millennials. It's the other generations, Gen X and Gen Y as well. So we, again, need to overcome that potential friction. And in the workshop that I mentioned, in the, I think it's the first or the second session of the workshop, we actually have people analyze their own network and see how diverse it is from a knowledge development point of view. However, whilst we want diversity, it creates a certain tension. But you need that tension for new knowledge. And I'm going to point you to the picture on the right again. And this is a classic diverse group of people. It's a group I worked with in ISO. We were working on ISO 10006, which is quality management in projects. And I look along the picture, and first guy at the top on the left, David, my friend from Kenya. Then I can't remember everyone else, but the next person is from Spain, the third person, Colombia, then Jim, he's from the UK. And then on the front row, there's a lady from China, a lady from the USA, and a gentleman from Japan. Forgive me for not remembering all of their names. It was 10 years ago when we worked together on this project. Now, we worked together and we came together with an understanding, because ISO puts a lot of emphasis on diversity and working together. We're not used to that. We have to deal with the potential tension. And that leads us into that skill of emotional intelligence. You might have wondered why that was in that list of top 6 skills. Well, EI has become prime importance, and it's about managing our emotions. And you can see how that becomes so important in diversity. EI is about what drives your own behavior and what drives others' behavior. And you see this picture of a couple that have just finished a game of chess. They're not fighting, they're shaking hands. Not sure who's won. I've had a look at this board a few times. I think I know who won, but it's a bit of a mess. The board, I think deliberately so. Thing is, they haven't fallen out with each other. And that's so important with diversity. We manage the emotions that address and we address the tensions. And that's especially true when we get under pressure. That's when emotions tend to get a bit out of control. More and more companies are investing in developing emotional intelligence and also looking at whether their partners demonstrate it. I do a lot of work in the Middle East, and you know, the cultures there pay a lot of attention to the, and they don't necessarily call it EI, but shall we say, the nature of the people they're going to work with. Whereas in the West, we tend to go straight to the financials. There, they look at the person. Am I going to be able to work with this person? Do they have that emotional intelligence I'm looking for? This all takes time, but investing in EI has a very big payback. And these are the sort of attributes that we're talking about. Knowing yourself, your self-awareness, as we call it, and being able to read other people's emotions. Many years ago, I did work on neuro-linguistic programming. It was fascinating. You learned how to intuitively pick up on other people's emotions. Listening, being a good listener, and I still find this hard. When somebody takes a run at me, not to take a run back at them. I think that's probably because I used to be a rugby player and it's sort of instinctive reaction. But learning to accept criticism, not on a personal basis. We all have different strengths and weaknesses, and we all have different areas of EI that we can develop. Overall, it's important to stay in control and then express ourselves to other people in an acceptable way. And that's where picking up on those non-verbal cues, and that's the NLP I talked about, but also having, shall we call it, a motivation, a desire to see things through. So EI is something that I strongly recommend you thinking about and seeing how you can develop it. You need to be willing to learn. You need to be able to tolerate, live with that ambiguity that I talked about at the beginning, the VUCA ambiguity. You need passion. You need to be optimistic. And you need to be adaptable. Am I going to persevere or am I going to be pivoting? And for innovators, those are critical skills. And finally, being a team player. And all of this, if you've participated in the world of innovation, you can see how all of these are essential skill sets. You can develop your EI. I recommend you do a web search, perhaps take 2 or 3 tests and score yourself. In our workshop, we do an EI assessment. But the important thing is to find the 2 or 3 areas that you should work on. Don't try to be too ambitious. Pick a couple of areas. Are you open to new experience? Are you diligent and conscientious? Do people find you disagreeable? Things like that. Something that came out of the World Economic Forum report was that emotional intelligence moving forward, and remember we're now in 2020, EI was going to be twice as important as the STEM skills. Interesting finding. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, you tend to think those are front and center in today's world of machine learning and artificial intelligence. But other people are going to take care of that. And, you know, as a result of that, we need to be dealing with the human interface. And again, in the workshop, we'll be working on a plan for development of emotional intelligence. So EI is integral with creativity, which we will come to, but it's essential for collaboration. And for collaboration, there's a long history to tell us that it's absolutely essential for success. It's on that list of skill sets from the WEF, but if you look at history, the great successes have come from great collaborators. Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel, which you see on the right here, his big partner was Sebastiano, but he had a team of a dozen people working with him. He didn't paint all of this himself. And then coming nearer the present day, Linus Pauling, he attributes his Nobel Prize in physics. They said it was physics, but for me, it was really chemistry. It was on chemical bonding. He attributes it to better collaboration, not better intellect. That's an interesting point. And then around about the same time, we're all familiar with those books, The Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia, let me get that right. And Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, they used to meet in a pub in Oxford every Tuesday evening and share thoughts. They weren't afraid to collaborate. And then right up to the present day, Sergey Brin, Larry Page, they conceived Google and brought together a Russian culture and an American culture, and they collaborated. And the whole concept of sharing knowledge and collaboration has been around for a long, long time. If you look at a race course, the bookmakers on a race course don't set their odds on their own expertise. They set their odds based on what the crowd thinks. And you might recall there was a book a few years back called The Wisdom of Crowds that talked about this whole concept. So a collaborative environment, even so, does have some challenges. And people need to feel safe and not open to criticism. You see why EI becomes important. We need to recognize that other people are bringing an asset. You know, I often get asked to collaborate. And one of the first questions I ask is, okay, so what is it you're looking for from my end? What do you think you can bring from your end? And if the other person says, well, yes, my contribution will be, I say, well, I think I can give this. And I look to see, are they two different bodies of knowledge? Because if you're the same, collaboration is going to have less value. But a good collaboration network one will bring market knowledge, another may bring intellectual property, a third may bring tools and technology. In other words, you're collaborating to bring together different elements of knowledge. At the same time, when other people bring something to the party, we may not fully value it. And you'll remember that book by Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of his 7 habits was seek to understand before you seek to be understood. And a point I always make when talking about collaboration is a bit of a challenge at the moment. As far as possible, try to do it face-to-face. I had my first face-to-face meeting actually yesterday afternoon. We were all wearing face masks. We were in a very large room and we were all at least 6 feet apart, and we kept the meeting as brief as possible. When we get out of this situation, I would say we're going to, as Andrew said in his introduction, we're going to be in a new world. We will do far, far more virtual collaboration, but don't eliminate face-to-face. And we're very careful about that in the world of ISO. We do most of our work virtually and have done for a longest time, but we do meet up at least once a year, and that's so important. And in the workshop that I keep mentioning, there will actually be an opportunity for people to do the innovation assessment, which a self-assessment of, which is on our website and tells people where they fit best in the innovation process. So networking to get knowledge comes best from open networking. That's how we share knowledge, and that's how we create new knowledge. We spark off each other. That's because we release that collective subconscious. We call it the spark of ingenuity. But the best networking comes with 2 degrees of separation. And a simple stat that you're probably already familiar with is that more people find a new job through a friend of a friend than through advertisements. That's that second degree of separation. There is a challenge, though, in all of this networking and collaboration. It's the challenge of stovepiping, because an open network very naturally morphs into a closed network. There's this danger of stovepiping and focusing on team only. In other words, our team's got to win. And we tend to fight against other teams in the organization. That's not a good thing. And it's actually a negative influence on the overall result. So we do need to be careful of that. Some research that I picked up recently said that it's actually possible to evaluate whether you're on the danger point of stovepiping, and you do it by analyzing your email traffic. So what you look at is how much of your email traffic is just within your own team, and how much of your email traffic is external to your team. If that internal to external ratio becomes greater than 5:1, you're stovepiping. And that's not too difficult to work out. So then we get all of what I've talked about is really, I'll call it preparation, but I've learned in life that good preparation, or let's call it a different way, well begun is half done. The preparation then enables us to go into divergent thinking to find creative solutions. And the thing about creative problem solving is we want many solutions. We use imagination, unconventional approaches. Disney calls it Imagineering. And we allow creativity to release things that we've got deep down we may not even remember that we've got. That's subconscious knowledge. And we're all naturally creative, but unfortunately, the business world and certainly the industrial world of the last 100 years has reduced that creativity. It's because the education system tends to knock it out of us. And more people are recognizing the importance of having diverse education. Andrew and I, just before we started this session, were talking about the schools we went to. The school I went to, which is in the UK, King Edward's in Birmingham, I was very fortunate that we did both arts and science even into the later years when most schools tend to specialize. So it is possible that we can restore creativity. And, you know, you need to ask yourself, am I engaging in something that's creative? I do a lot of writing. I love to paint, but I never find the time. I wish I could. Others of you probably play music. If you're not doing, and I'm talking about doing it, not observing it, not reading, not listening, not just looking, but actually doing it. And if you find these a challenge, you know, amateur theatre is always there. And it's a great way of building back your creativity. And just to endorse the importance of this, IBM did it 10 years ago, their CEO survey pointed to the importance of creativity. A little over 5 years ago, PricewaterhouseCoopers had a similar survey with similar findings. And to the great man himself, Albert Einstein, no problem can be solved with the same level of consciousness that created it. So you see the importance of creativity. A danger here, though, is that people jump straight into creative problem solving and they don't define the problem. This is so important. When I do organizational assessments on innovation, I find this is one of the biggest areas of failure, that people kind of say, well, I just want new ideas. They don't get the problem defined first. They tend to merge the two. People need to fully understand the issue and agree a definition of the problem before we start to solve it. And in fact, in today's workshop I was doing earlier today, we worked on this particular thing. It's not easy defining a problem, and it's easy to overlook it. There are many tools. Customer experience mapping. It's just process mapping, but flagging the points where the customer has highs and lows. I'm talking emotional highs and lows. So we must avoid jumping to solutions. And when we get to actually solving the problem, we've got to specify it in concept terms. So today we actually did an exercise on problem definition. So the specific skill sets in problem solving, the actual solutioning, come from first using creativity, which I've been talking about, and then using critical thinking to select the best solution. And to endorse what I've said about defining the problem, another Einstein quote: if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem. I love that. So if we're going to be creative, we need to loosen up. There are many techniques for creative problem solving, or ideation as we now call it. And it's important to go through some kind of exercises beforehand. And in the theatre, they do this if they're doing improv. Quite simple. It's easy to do. You don't need any equipment. Say there's a dozen of you, you stand in a circle. You may have done this sometime in the past. First person, say it's me, says, "It's a beautiful day out there." And I clap my hands. And then the second person says, "I think I'll go for a walk." And claps their hands. And the third person says, "I'll put my new shoes on." Okay. And then the fourth person says, "I'm going to do something a little different." They say that to themselves. And they say, "I think I'll take my swimming things with me." And now we're starting to see the whole conversation going down a different road. And that makes people become increasingly creative. Very simple exercise, but it loosens up that lateral thinking, as Edward de Bono calls it. So ideation, or the idea creation, there are many methods, tends to follow a very similar process. Most people, well, first of all, it's important for people to start on their own, and they can usually write down 3 or 4 alternatives. Important is they do it on their own and they don't get challenged. Then they share their ideas with one neighbor and they talk, and when I'm facilitating this, I find, after a couple of minutes, you hear somebody laugh and you think, great, we're on our way now. People have got freedom to laugh. And then they share with another neighbor, and gradually they do this. We actually did this virtually this morning. It's tougher when you do it virtually. But one team actually got over 20 ideas as a result. There are many techniques. They all follow that kind of pattern. They just use different methods to introduce randomness. Brainwriting, that's okay, but there's no conversation. Clustering, that's been around for 100 years. Stravinsky used it for writing the Rites of Spring. Storyboarding, you've probably all seen that, where everybody puts Post-it notes on the wall. Not so keen on that because it doesn't take the thing far enough. Most methods use cards. I encourage you to use multiple techniques. Now, there are other methods, Scamper and Trees. Trees, I've got reservations. It's way too complicated. People spend their whole lives learning how to use it, and it is quite analytical. It came from a fascinating guy, Heinrich Alsler in Russia. I won't tell you the full story, but you look him up, and the story is really interesting. So coming back to what we're doing, we're dealing with complex problems. And so when we are doing this ideation, we want to focus on links between the processes, not the processes themselves, links where we see this breakdown, and where there is transfer of information. That's what happens when there's a break in a link. And then there's the epiphany. A lot of people, and this is an intriguing narrative, a lot of people think it all happens at the epiphany, because it often comes unexpectedly. People relax, and the classic story is about Archimedes. I remember, in my school physics, the physics teacher telling us, well, Archimedes had been tasked by the king to see if the crown was adulterated with base metals. He took a bath and the water overflowed, and he got his idea of specific gravity. And I keep saying, that's only part of the story. He took a bath and he relaxed. And it's often between sessions that we get these great ideas. And so you want multiple sessions. And you want some way of capturing those ideas, an electronic repository between sessions. And in fact, people who've come out of this morning's workshop session are going to be working on ideation. So then we've got lots of ideas. Again, quoting Linus Pauling, the best way to get a good idea is to get lots of ideas, then throw away the bad ones. So we've got to move beyond creativity now for complex problem solving and sort our ideas for time, cost, risk, and so on. And that's where the next skill of critical thinking comes in. On that WEF list, it was actually at number 2, and creativity was at number 3, but I see the two going hand in hand. So the earliest record of critical thinking was with Socrates. And what he brought out was the importance of probing thinking, finding evidence, particularly validating sources of information, still needing to be open-minded, still being able to work with others, but being tasked now with narrowing down to the best path forwards. And people with a scientific background certainly are very experienced in this field. This is what we were trained to do. Scientists and engineers were trained in critical thinking. A critical thinking will question the solutions that have been proposed and do it by gathering information and, you see it in red here, evaluating the credibility of sources. And today that is so important with so much false information. You know, look at the coronavirus and the misinformation. I'm trusting there's nobody listening who's tried drinking Lysol, forgive me. Test solutions against the criteria for the solution, and critical thinkers will converge to a consensus and arrive at well-reasoned conclusions. So this is the analysis piece. And we probably narrow down to 2 or 3 alternatives and test them. We won't throw everything out, but when you're doing all of this, you want to minimize your expenditure before you actually go to the real solution. And you'll probably test 2 or 3 alternatives. So the end game in critical thinking, which is the analysis part, is where we gather the information we've got from creativity. We test the assumptions for time to implement, cost to implement, risk of working. We restructure our thoughts. We've gained new knowledge. And we may have a couple of iterations of steps 2 and 3, maybe more. But we come to conclusions and select. And we select 2 or 3 finally preferred solutions. And we test that to see if it'll work. Now, the problem here is that people who work in R&D think it's game over. Well, the solution then has to be translated into action. And that's how you resolve the complex problem. Only when the solution is implemented have you solved the problem. So these are the steps I've taken you through. First of all, you need to recognize complexity. Look out for it. Perhaps, a bit of chaos. You need that diverse group of solvers, but for them to work together, you need to have emotional intelligence. That way you've created a collaborative environment, a network environment, and then you get into, shall I call it showtime? You go divergent using creative methods to develop many alternative solutions. Then you converge through critical thinking to find the best path forward. And of course, that is how you innovate. Well, that's the innovation process. And that's what complex problem solving is all about, finding innovative new solutions. And just very quickly, I've kept mentioning the workshop, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but you see quickly here the different, what we do in each week. They're 2-hour sessions. And we're just coming to the end of our current workshop. Next week will be the last one, but we're planning to repeat it in July and August. So the path forward, look at your emotional intelligence. Find one or a couple of areas that you perhaps need to work on. Step out of the box and become creative. Find some kind of creative activity. We call it work-life balance sometimes, but this is a bit more than that. This is more specific. And if you're interested, contact me about the workshop, the next one we'll be running on complex problem solving. There's my email address, or you can go to our website to find more information. And so I will hand back to Andrew now and take any questions. I've gone a little over the 40 minutes. It's 50 minutes. Wow. So I will stop sharing, and I think, Andrew, you will take the screen back.
Thank you very much, Peter. So thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. You stimulated a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts. So I think, first of all, we should say that part of our intention of working together is that we, I'm going to say at the moment, promote the workshops that you're doing as an extension of what we're trying to do, and we collaborate on them. Maybe in the future, there may even be some way to jointly offer them. So certainly, we're trying to work on that. Secondly, I think I'm going to ask like one big question and one small question, because there's obviously a lot of discussion. So, I'm sitting here in a university. We have programs that we're redesigning for high schools. We have programs we're designing for undergrad, and we're designing professional education programs. In general, what you just said blows up all of the traditional models of education. If you ask high schools, do they teach creativity and creative problem solving, critical thinking? They don't really. Kindergarten does. So do we do that in university? In general, no. And then in professional education, I'm going to say traditional MBA. No, we don't. Some of them, maybe some research-based ones, or when you do a special executive education program, we do that. How do we transform our system? Because it sounds like we're preparing people for jobs that existed 20 years ago, not for jobs that are going to exist in 5 years' time.
Yeah, and that's a very, very, shall we say, apposite question. It's a question everybody's asking. I mentioned that I do a lot of assessments in the Middle East, and I actually recently, well, last year, did an assessment at one of the universities there. And as you probably know, every university is questioning the concept of the 3-year degree because knowledge is moving so fast at the moment that by the time somebody's completed their 3 years, what they did in year one may have been superseded. It's okay for profound knowledge, the stuff that doesn't change. And that's true even in the world of innovation. I mentioned Stravinsky and clustering. But I think, and what's also interesting is in the course that we do on Tuesdays, which is about the 56,000 standard, we've actually got somebody from one of the American universities who's there, and she's asking exactly the same question as you're asking. And I don't know that anybody's yet got the answer. There's a certain fear, shall I say, because we're going to tip the table over. My reading, listening to different people, is that we're likely to see a fragmentation of the classic 3-year degree course. I see you nodding, and that's so hard to swallow because that's been with us for 500 years. And, oh my God. But at the same time, people want to have something of substance. And a 1-year thing doesn't necessarily demonstrate substance. So there's no classic answer, but at the same time, I think we're all, there are definitions of the problem out there. I think everybody's feeling very nervous about the alternative solutions. I'm not sure what you would add to that, Andrew, but I've kind of evaded the question, but in a way I'm saying it's certainly going to mean things like the 3-year degree is going to be deeply challenged.
So my simple answer to that question is the same that I would talk about with every type of disruption. It's going to come from outside universities, and universities are going to be disrupted because universities are so entrenched in the current system and the current way of doing things that they just have so much inertia. I describe it as I describe my job in universities as being the person with the digital camera that I've just invented at Kodak, walking into the chemical plant in Rochester and saying to the people running all the film processing lines, I have this great new thing to tell you about. Yeah. And it's like, well, what language do you understand? We have to get our uptime, and we've got to get production control up or whatever. So I think that's probably a challenge. Let me ask the more detailed question, and you can take any, we're kind of running out of time. So we can take any
both good, but sometimes
aspect.
One you can read, one of them you realize you can do this on your own.
Sorry, I've just lost you for a second, Peter.
It's okay. I can hear you, Andrew. There was just...
Okay. Anyway, the
detailed question.
How do we? I mean, most of the educators that we have in high schools and in university are geared around teaching content, not about building skills. And so, how can we transform it? And linked to that, how can we recognize achievements in skills? So it's great to say, build your creativity, but at some point in time, we have to have some, well, maybe we don't, but I'm thinking we have to have some way of measuring that. Is it that you've completed something? Is it you've achieved a certain level? How do we actually show people progress? Because one of the problems in any traditional perspective on education, even at executive level, is to say, what have you learned over that period? And I struggle not with any of the things you want to teach people, not any of the things, the relevance, not even how you do it, but I struggle to find a way of defining when people have had that experience.
And listening to you, take me back to when I was at university, and we had something called interfaculty studies, where everybody in engineering had to do something in one of the other faculties. And I remember I did crime and punishment, which was fascinating. And I brought engineering and mathematical concepts to the discussion group, which often shocked the people on the art side. And then when I was at school, before that, we had in the final year, when we did our A-levels, we had a thing called general studies. And so, I had to understand the work of Constable and so forth. And I think those first steps, which were many years ago, really, they represented the caution of taking time away from the core study. In other words, how's this person going to become a successful engineer if we steal their time into creative activities and artistic things? I think we're recognizing now the value of that balance, in other words, the balanced education, and that it actually produces a better result. And when you look at these skill sets in the WEF, I am so glad that I did my postgrad in behavioral sciences. And when people ask me now, I say, look for a postgrad that deals with human skills, because that is going to so equip you when you get out in the business world. So, you're closer to the action in the university than I am, clearly. And I'm just giving you my simple thoughts on this, really.
No, I think it's a very valuable insight. I'm an engineer by training. I have an MBA. When I did my PhD at Waterloo, it was in the Faculty of Management Science, but I spent all my time talking about psychology, decision-making, behavioral economics. And it was like a really interesting journey. Maybe that's why it took me so long to finish my PhD. But it was really interesting because I had come in from a perspective that people make logical decisions based on functional needs. And I found out that actually they make emotional decisions most of the time and then justify the functional component to align with their emotional ones. And I had no idea that that was the case. So
I'd like to point you to a very useful paper, and this is perhaps something to share with everybody. It was one I picked up over the weekend. It was written in Atlantic magazine, and the title was Secrets of the Creative Brain. And it was written by a professor from the University of Iowa. And I forget her exact name, but those 3 points should be sufficient.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. So first of all, I do want to thank you. I do also want to end on time. So you've given us a lot to think about. And in fact, you've actually done something that we had not deliberately done, but like most serendipitous things, is going to work out. Part of the reason for doing this seminar series was to identify how we could most add value to the community around innovation. How, assuming that people had to do different things, do different jobs, take on different challenges, respond in different ways, how could we better prepare them? And part of, therefore, what we're doing is asking questions. And I think you've raised, it's like a topic list for future seminars, workshops. We do want to make sure that many of these different skills are that we don't just create a dead end, so that we tell people about your workshop, or maybe there's other activities that we're doing, or we even create some new ones at Lausanne, which is certainly definitely on our agenda. And so what I would suggest is, first of all, we will post links on an ongoing basis to all of your workshops, even if it's just a referral. We will also, within our community, which is I think 6,000 people now, we will post links to this lesson and the resources and the references that you've done. If you're comfortable, we'll share the PowerPoint as well, because I think it's very insightful. And these events are every 2 weeks. We have the next one will be in 2 weeks' time. I will have Tony Ulwick, who was one of the founders of the Jobs to be Done and Job Mapping and Customer-Centric Innovation Roadmap as my guest. At the moment, I'm not sure whether it will be a recorded interview or a live one, because I'm actually talking to him next week because I'm introducing him at the World Innovation Conference. But we will continue to do that. And I encourage everybody that's part of this event today to follow us on our various social media channels, because we will be announcing more. And I also want to emphasize something. We don't know what we should be teaching, and we don't always know the best way to teach, or we don't know even how to recognize when people have achieved certain levels of teaching success. But we're working on it, and we're trying new things, and we're working with people that are thought leaders like yourself, Peter, to help bring new perspectives, new insights, and new value to the community. Because at the end of the day, I think the 3-year degree is dead, but I think the university community is going to become more important. And hopefully we're that catalyst, so that we are a community university engaging with our community to help them address whatever these challenges are for personal growth, job growth, and ultimately, economic growth.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you everyone for joining us. If there's any specific information that people didn't get the answers to, they can send a note through. Omid, if you can just post like your general email address, and then we can talk about the things that we're doing, and we can keep you linked on as we launch some of these new programs. We are launching them all the time, and if we don't do them ourselves, we are working collaboratively with partners like Peter to create state-of-the-art activities to help people through this challenging time.
Andrew, thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. So Omid's posted his link on there, Omid at lausannepd.ca. Thank you so much, Omid. Thank you for joining us today. And I think we're going to end the session now. So thank you.